general. After traveling some distance from the city, he suddenly called out, asking someone to reveal themselves. Dozens of men in black emerged from their concealment, with one stepping right next to Vikir. "Apologies for keeping you waiting," Vikir said, addressing the man who introduced himself as Staffordshire Baskerville of the Pitbull Order. He assured Vikir they would escort him safely to the Morg's juvenile fortress. Inquiring about his uncle Boston Terrier, Vikir discovered that he was well but had become increasingly insistent about Vikir joining the Pitbull Order following the incident at the slave auction. Despite this, Vikir couldn't shake the unease his uncle caused him. As they approached a hilly area, Vikir spotted farmers working in the fields. He asked if this was the territory they had lent to the Morgs, noting its peacefulness and the absence of any law violations. Staffordshire confirmed that the envoy team had been dispatched for inspection, though Vikir was aware their true mission involved dealing with the barbarians. Staffordshire revealed that the Morg family had mobilized a significant force, 3 delegates, 30 lower house parliament members, and around 100 mages who weren't part of the legislative body. Vikir noted the Morg's serious approach to the situation. However, he couldn't help but think that the Baskervilles had only sent a dozen knights, with him being the sole lower house parliament member, while the elite forces remained on the other side of the mountain range. He recalled Hugo's advice to observe the lifestyle of the barbarians. As they continued along their path, a fortress came into view in the distance, surrounded by dead trees, with skeletons hanging from the branches. "That must be the work of a mage," Vikir remarked to Staffordshire, recognizing it as a warning from the Morgs to the barbarians. "It's a chilling message," Staffordshire responded. Vikir found himself reminiscing about Kimu Morg, wondering how much she had changed since their last encounter. As they approached the fortress gate, 3 figures appeared atop it. A voice called out, demanding to know their identities. Vikir and Staffordshire looked up, surprised to see 3 identical girls, Hysis, Middlesis, and Losis, known as the Morg's 3 Flowers. Their infamous reputation for insanity preceded them, with their collective madness rumored to be boundless. Vikir introduced himself as a member of the envoy team from the Baskervilles, sent to inspect the territory and establish friendly relations. He ordered that the fortress gates be opened, but Hysis refused, insisting that she needed to report to the person in charge first, suggesting they wait for a response until the following day. Vikir challenged their right to prevent him from entering his own territory, but the triplets simply smirked in response. "Don't forget the tenant protection law," Hysis teased, mocking him for looking down on them, as they were paying rent. "That law was established by your family." Vikir felt a throbbing headache as the Morg's 3 Flowers persisted with their relentless questioning. A red aura began to emanate from his hand, fueled by his mounting irritation. Despite his frustration, he kept his composure and calmly reiterated that he had revised the tenant protection law, granting him the authority to evict anyone he deemed undesirable. He issued one final, low-intensity demand for the gates to be opened, his voice laced with intensity. A palpable wave of killing intent radiated from him, directed squarely at the triplets, causing them to pale in fear. Just as the tension reached a boiling point, Losis erupted in fury, unleashing a spell aimed directly at Vikir. "I've heard about that psycho kid taking charge of the underdog city," she shouted, her eyes blazing with anger. "We've dealt with enough of your kind before." The spell struck the ground near Vikir, causing his horse to rear back in fright. "Don't even think about stepping onto Morg land without permission, you stupid swordsman," she mocked, her voice echoing ominously across the fortress. Staffordshire instinctively drew his sword, sensing that diplomacy was quickly becoming a lost cause. "This won't be resolved with words, Vikir," he warned, his grip tightening around the hilt. Vikir nodded, the readiness for a fight evident in his posture. Just then, one of his group members shouted, "They don't even know their place." A chorus of agreement echoed around them, heightening the tension in the air. The Morg triplets exchanged smirks, clearly amused by the situation. Hysis shot back, "Look at you mere underlings. Do you really think your ranks matter here?" Middlesis chimed in, mocking their audacity, while Losis sneered at their apparent ignorance. Vikir's group members stepped forward, denying the Morg's claims and repeating "not us" like a mantra, trying to drown out the relentless taunts. Suddenly, the hoods of the newcomers were thrown back, revealing the familiar faces of the Baskerville triplets, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough. With an air of confidence, they pointed at Vikir, proclaiming in unison, "He's the symbol of Baskerville." Their declaration caught Vikir off guard, and he grimaced, muttering under his breath that his annoyance had just doubled. Vikir's mind raced as he tried to discern their motivations. Despite the triplets' bizarre behavior, he couldn't ignore the potential their actions held. Highborough glanced back at him, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thanks for recommending us to the academy. We've got this," he said, nodding toward the Morgs, a hint of determination in his tone. Vikir couldn't shake the feeling that the triplets, while capable, were still just sandbags in his plans. However, he understood their connection to the academy and the pivotal role they would play in his future endeavors. A smile broke across his face as he declared, "I trust you guys. You're like my older brothers now." The Baskerville triplets beamed at his words, delight lighting up their expressions. In stark contrast, the Morg's three flowers watched in disgust, their faces contorting with disdain. "You ignorant fools, relying on each other like that," they scoffed, their voices dripping with scorn. And faced by the insults, the Baskervilles shot back defiantly, brandishing their middle fingers in a bold gesture of rebellion. The Morg seethed with rage, their anger palpable as they vowed to teach the Baskerville triplets a lesson for their insolence. Vikir's thoughts drifted back to his knowledge of the Morg triplets. Before his regression, he had recognized them as formidable mages, each wielding the elemental powers of water, earth, and nature. Their synergistic magical abilities had earned them the title the Morg's Three Flowers, known for their devastatingly effective spells. As the triplets combined their powers, a colossal vine of entwined soil and plants surged forth, erecting an imposing barrier between them and their opponents. Hysis, perched atop the wall, erupted into laughter, her taunts piercing the air like arrows. "Do you really think you can overcome this?" she jeered, turning her gaze to the Baskerville triplets. And daunted, Highborough unsheathed his sword, scoffing at the plant barrier before him. With remarkable precision, he executed the Baskerville first technique, slicing through the massive vines as if they were mere twigs. Staffordshire watched in awe, marveling at Highborough's flawless execution. But just as he prepared to recover from the strike, whip-like vines lashed out, forcing him to block with his sword. The impact pushed him back, leaving Middleborough and Lowborough shouting their concerns. Losis wore a smug grin, her confidence palpable. "Your swords can't reach us," she taunted, igniting the anger of the Baskerville triplets, whose expressions transformed into fierce determination, like hounds ready to hunt. Staffordshire turned to Vikir, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Enjoying the spectacle?" he asked. Confused, Vikir raised an eyebrow. "Look at this clash between magic and swordsmanship," Staffordshire explained, his enthusiasm growing. It was a long-standing debate over which force reigned supreme: magic, which amplified elemental powers through surrounding mana, or swordsmanship, which channeled personal energy for explosive strength. Staffordshire reveled in the display of talent and potential from both clans, envisioning a future shaped by their rivalry. Suddenly, a figure charged onto the scene, unleashing a fiery spell with undeniable authority. "What are you doing in front of our territory?" they barked. Highborough, seizing the moment, lunged at Hysis, believing he had the upper hand. But the atmosphere shifted dramatically as a massive fireball hurtled toward them, leaving everyone momentarily paralyzed. The explosion reverberated through the area, sending waves of heat and chaos. Staffordshire's expression tightened with concern, but Vikir couldn't suppress a smirk, wondering if this would finally bring an end to the escalating brawl. His amusement was fleeting, however, as he realized the Baskerville triplets had somehow weathered the onslaught, their resilience shining through. He shot them a disapproving glare, exhaling in frustration. "Where did that fire magic come from?" Highborough exclaimed, shock etched across his features. Middleborough, still shaken, shouted at the figures obscured by smoke, his frustration boiling over after their brush with disaster. As the smoke began to dissipate, the Morg's three flowers staggered forward, terror shimmering in their eyes. Middlesex, trembling, let out a relieved sigh. "I thought we were done for," she cried. Hysis added, her voice quivering, "If I'd dodged just a second later." Losis, gripped by fear, turned to her sisters, her voice trembling as she voiced her anxieties. What if it happens again? From atop the castle gate wall, the figure responsible for the fiery spell surveyed the scene with a blend of anger and curiosity. "What's going on here?" Kimu Morg demanded, flames still flickering in her hands, casting an eerie glow around her. Kimu looked down from her vantage point, her gaze steely as she declared that she would not forgive anyone who dared to disrupt the peace within her territory. She landed gracefully before the Morg's 3 flowers, causing Middlesis to stammer an explanation. "We were just trying to stop the invader," she managed to say, while Losis chimed in. "The fight was started by the other party." Kimu fixed them with a chilling stare, her voice laced with authority as she reprimanded them for addressing her so casually. "You should remember to call me vice head of the fortress, not just Kimu," she insisted. Middlesis shuddered in fear, quickly correcting herself and offering the appropriate honorifics, her voice trembling. With a gesture towards the treetops, where dead skeletons swung ominously in the breeze, Kimu warned them to tread carefully if they wished to avoid meeting a similar fate. A frightened cry escaped Middlesis as she hurriedly apologized for their earlier actions. As Camus's gaze shifted, it landed on Vikir, and her eyes widened in recognition. "It's been a long time," she remarked, stepping closer with a hint of nostalgia. 7 years, to be exact. Vikir smiled, acknowledging the truth of her statement. "Indeed, it has." "Hello, Kimu Morg." He couldn't help but notice how much she had matured. Her beauty had blossomed, capturing the attention of many men in high society. In his previous life, he recalled the scandals and whispers that surrounded her allure, even enticing some married men. Oddly, however, there seemed to be no such rumors this time around. He pushed those thoughts aside, refocusing on the pressing matters before them. "Can you open the door? Words won't work on the triplets," Vikir stated bluntly. Kimu blinked, taken aback by his forthrightness. Anger flickered in her eyes. "Is that really all you have to say after all this time?" Vikir raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What else should I say?" "0 points for that attitude," she shot back, frustration welling up as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "You're being disrespectful to your future wife." The stunned expressions of the Morg's 3 flowers, the Baskerville triplets, Vikir, and Staffordshire mirrored the same question: whose wife? As they rode toward the fortress, Kimu remarked, "It seems the Baskerville clan has a limited understanding of the barbarians." Vikir replied confidently, "We know them well. We've fought against them frequently and understand them better than you Morgs do." Kimu raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident. "Then why did you send those idiots?" She referred to the young and inexperienced Baskerville triplets. Vikir explained that it had been agreed upon with the Morg clan that the main force would be stationed on the other side of the mountain range. "Why ask me when you already know the arrangement?" Kimu smiled knowingly. "I thought you might be out of the loop regarding the barbarians. I'm in charge of the delegation. Staying informed is my responsibility," he retorted, his tone firm. Kimu noted, "Despite being someone the clan might consider discarding, you seem to hold a significant amount of trust." The conversation then shifted to which barbaric tribe posed the greatest threat. Vikir looked at Kimu, contemplating her persistent inquiries. "The Balak warrior tribe and the Rococo sorcerer tribe," he replied, detailing the exceptional archery skills of the Balaks that surpassed those of the Empire. "And that's not widely known either." Kimu acknowledged his insights, assigning him 8 points out of 100 in her peculiar scoring system. "What's the purpose of the points?" Vikir asked, a look of confusion crossing his face. "Because you answered well," she replied, her tone nonchalant. Intrigued, Vikir studied her closely. Kimu continued her evaluation, expressing her distaste for intelligent men, claiming she preferred them a bit foolish. She critiqued his choice of a large horse, deeming it unsuitable for his shorter stature and deducting 6 points for that misstep. Next, she turned her attention to fashion, expressing disappointment in his clothing and awarding him a mere 4 points. When she noticed him ignoring her, she decided to give him just 1 point for his manners. However, she smiled and awarded his face a staggering 99 points, only to subtract 1 for his lack of control over his expressions. Frustrated, Vikir finally snapped, "Can we stop with the pointless evaluation?" "Pointless? I need to be firm with my future husband," she countered, and wavering in her stance. "Why am I considered your future husband?" Vikir asked, incredulous. Kimu reminded him of a test he had passed years ago, conducted by her uncle. Realization washed over Vikir as he recalled the duel with her uncle, designed to assess his worthiness as a potential husband. Kimu vented her frustrations about her uncle's decision, which had thwarted her path to marriage. Yet, she begrudgingly acknowledged the promise made and her intent to honor it, even if she resented the situation. As Kimu continued her tirade, Vikir observed her closely, recognizing her prowess as a formidable fire mage. Suddenly, he interjected, declaring that he had forgotten what had transpired that day, vowing to treat it as if it had never happened. Camus's face flushed a bright red at his words. "You can't just reverse what happened," she exclaimed, hurling a jacket at him. "Dummy." Vikir grinned as he caught the jacket, realizing it was the same one he had given her during their duel 7 years ago, after her clothes had been burned. Kimu, her cheeks still flushed, dismissed his comments as nonsense. As they reached the outskirts of the fortress, Kimu turned serious, informing Vikir that the barbarians had ambushed the ruby mine, either pillaging indigenous slaves or raiding crime elsewhere. Pointing to a newly constructed wall, she noted it had been built by both earth and iron mages over the past month, standing sturdy against the looming threat. Impressed, Vikir acknowledged the skill of the Morg mages, noting that it would have taken several hundred ordinary people nearly a year to achieve the same result. Kimu beamed with pride at his recognition. As Vikir examined the wall, he noticed several large holes and asked if they were caused by arrows shot by the Baloks. Kimu confirmed his suspicion, explaining that the arrows were imbued with a powerful aura and had resulted in numerous casualties during nighttime guard duty. She added that these arrows could penetrate to 3 meters of thick walls, showcasing the exceptional talent of the Balok warriors. Kimu also mentioned that her uncle had suffered a severe chest injury from arrows that breached the magic of the shield. Fortunately, he had survived, though his pride was significantly wounded. Vikir recalled a similar incident involving the patriarch of his clan, who had sustained an injury to his nose bridge during a confrontation. Curious, Vikir asked about the talented individual among the barbarians, to which Kimu replied that she believed it was a female. The black-painted faces of the barbarians made it difficult to discern their physical features. As they spoke, a mage approached them, addressing Kimu as the vice-head of the fortress. The mage reported that a recon member of the barbarians had been captured and urged them to follow him quickly. Concerned yet intrigued, Kimu and Vikir followed the mage to a tent where the captive barbarian was being held. Upon entering, Vikir observed the prisoner closely and identified him as a member of the Rococo sorcerer tribe. Kimu immediately inquired if any information had been extracted from the captive. The mage shook his head, explaining that the barbarian remained uncooperative and was resistant to psychic magic, rendering it impossible to read his mind due to his strong sorcery. Kimu then turned her attention to the barbarian, questioning him about the recent ambush on the Morg clan's fortress and asking if he remembered how many people had been kidnapped. When he remained silent, she pressed on, noting that among the victims was a daughter of the Morg's Rose, her 6th cousin. She demanded to know what had been done to her. The barbarian responded with a sly smile, speaking in his native tongue. Frustrated, Kimu glanced at the mage, requesting a translation. She inquired about the whereabouts of the rebel barbarian, hoping for some clarity. The mage informed her that during the attack, everyone at the fortress had either died or been taken captive. Desperate for answers, Kimu asked if there was anyone present who could translate the barbarian's words. The mage regretfully replied that, at that moment, no one was available to assist. Suddenly, Vikir interjected, revealing that he knew a little of the Rococo language. Kimu raised an eyebrow in surprise, questioning what Vikir didn't know how to do. He clarified that he wasn't fluent, only possessing a basic understanding of the vocabulary. Kimu urged Vikir to ask the barbarian about the whereabouts of her kidnapped sixth cousin, describing her as a 12-year-old girl with red eyes, red hair, and pale skin. Vikir turned to the barbarian and posed the question in the Rococo language. The barbarian responded with a sinister smile and gave him a brief reply. Vikir closed his eyes, bracing himself before relaying the grim news to Kimu. Her cousin was dead. Anger surged through Camus's expression as she absorbed the devastating revelation. Kimu declared that, with the senator of the audience hall currently receiving treatment and the senator of the temple away on an inspection, the decision fell to her, Kimu Morg, a member of the middle house and the vice head of the fortress. She announced the verdict: immediate execution. A spike pierced the barbarian's body, and flames quickly engulfed him. As he burned, he uttered something, but Kimu dismissed his words with a chilling retort, asserting that after the war, the language he spoke would only be fit for hell. The barbarian's companion watched in horror as he met his fiery end. Still seething with anger, Kimu turned and urged Vikir to follow her. Vikir silently observed her departing figure, a mix of admiration and unease swirling within him. As Vikir exited the tent, he was met with the sight of Kimu crying out loud. He approached her, recognizing that beneath her tough exterior, she was still just 15 years old. Vikir gently inquired about her close relationship with her cousin, and Kimu confirmed their bond, describing her cousin as a pure soul who never truly fit into the cold-hearted Morg clan. Vikir attempted to console her, expressing his belief that her cousin had left this world peacefully. However, Kimu looked at him skeptically, voicing her doubts. "I'm a genius," she stated, "and I understand a bit of what was said." She pressed him for the truth, asking if what she had heard was real. Vikir felt a wave of tension wash over him as he wondered whether she had grasped the barbarian's words correctly. The chilling phrase echoed in his mind, "We ate her." Tears flooded Camus's eyes once more as she fell to her knees, apologizing for her inability to protect her younger cousin. Vikir observed her anguish and instinctively reached out his hand to comfort her. But just as quickly, he hesitated, pulling it back instead. Camus's cries echoed around them, leaving Vikir standing there, deep in thought about the situation. After a while, Kimu finally composed herself, wiping the tears from her eyes. Kimu declared that it wasn't a bad thing to show restraint, noting that if anyone had offered half-hearted sympathy, she would have killed them. Looking intently at Vikir, she asserted that it wasn't the time for mourning. She needed to regain her composure and seek revenge. Vikir admired her strength and determination, recognizing that heroines were indeed different. He extended his hand toward her, agreeing with her sentiment. However, before she could grasp it, a loud, bell-like chime echoed through the air. Vikir asked about the source of the sound, and Kimu stood up, explaining that it was the signal announcing a barbarian attack. "Looks like your chance for revenge has come quickly," he remarked. Outside the fortress, a group of barbarian girls sat atop white wolves, armed with bows and arrows. Their leader knocked an arrow and shot it toward the guards on the fortress walls. Taken by surprise, the guards were slow to react, and the arrow detonated with devastating force in their midst. The barbarian girl then commanded her companions to begin the assault. Chaos erupted as the barbarian and her wolves fiercely engaged the Morg soldiers. The wolves attacked with relentless ferocity while the barbarian slashed at their foes. Ropes were used to ensnare the soldiers' necks, incapacitating them in brutal fashion. Just as the chaos unfolded, Vikir arrived on the scene, his heart racing at the gruesome sight before him. He wondered if he had come too soon, witnessing the intense clash between the Morg soldiers and the barbarian attackers. Suddenly, a rope flew toward Vikir, wrapping tightly around his neck. He looked ahead, bewildered, and realized that two barbarian girls had skillfully secured it around him. They chattered in their native tongue, laughing about catching a good one and how well the hunt for husbands was going. The realization struck him: the barbarians were capturing men to become suitors, aiming to breed a superior race for their tribe. With a swift motion, Vikir grasped the rope and swung it, sending the girls who held the leash flying through the air. "I can't be your husband," he declared, "and I might already be engaged." As the two girls crashed to the ground, The male barbarians watched in shock, their faces a mix of confusion and surprise. They began preparing for an arrow assault, and certain of Vikir's allegiance. One of the barbarians turned to his companion, asking if Vikir was part of the enemy forces. And fazed by the situation, Vikir didn't flinch. He boldly advanced toward the incoming arrows, recalling Hugo's earlier insistence that he avoid starting a battle before linking up with the main force. Should he wait for reinforcements to arrive, the thought flickered in his mind, but determination surged within him. With a fluid motion, he drew his sword and began slicing through the incoming arrows with precise strikes, showcasing his skill and agility. The barbarians were momentarily stunned by Vikir's display of skill, their disbelief evident in their expressions. However, their surprise quickly turned to horror as a sudden fire attack engulfed them, causing them to cry out in pain. Kimu, who had unleashed the fire spell, emerged behind Vikir, her eyes blazing with fury as she declared the barbarian's demise. Vikir turned to her in astonishment, realizing that she had transformed the entire area into a raging sea of fire. Kimu then questioned him, asking if he had used liquid aura, clearly recognizing his abilities as a graduator. "I knew you were the only man I could acknowledge," she added. Vikir confirmed that he had received orders from the Patriarch to avoid battles until they regrouped with the main force. But Kimu, undeterred, began casting multiple spells, asking if it was an order from Baskerville's Patriarch. "A Baskerville should refrain from intervening," she asserted, "as I intend to eliminate all the barbarians myself." With that, Kimu unleashed a torrent of powerful attacks, igniting a vast area in front of them. Vikir watched in shock as he recognized her spell as burn. He noted that she was employing a quadra-casting technique for her burning spells, significantly increasing their lethality. Fueled by the desire to avenge her younger cousin, Kimu continued her relentless barrage, determined to exact her revenge. Suddenly, a barbarian aimed a dart blower and shot a needle that landed on Camus's neck. She felt a sharp sting and realized she had been poisoned. As the numbing toxin coursed through her veins, she spotted a barbarian seated on a Wolf's back, the one responsible for her affliction. Unable to move, she fell to the ground, her body betraying her. Vikir, observing her condition, thought to himself that she was quite a handful. Just then, the barbarian threw a rope toward Kimu, but Vikir reacted swiftly, catching it midair before it could reach her. Kimu acknowledged his catch with a grateful smile, complimenting him on his reflexes. Vikir looked at her, concern etched on his face. "We should retreat," he suggested, urgency creeping into his voice. Kimu frowned, questioning what would happen to the farmlands and the captives. Vikir replied, "It's wiser to avoid engaging in battles until the main force from Baskerville arrives." Determined to avenge her cousin, who had been taken by the barbarians, Kimu steadfastly refused to retreat. Vikir pressed her to make a rational decision, but before he could argue further, he sensed an arrow hurtling toward them from behind. With quick reflexes, he dodged just in time, narrowly escaping the attack. His gaze landed on the barbarian girl who had launched the arrow, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was the destructive power Kimu had mentioned earlier. While lost in his thoughts, Vikir suddenly sensed a disturbance behind him. Before he could react, a barbarian girl lunged forward, swiftly snatching Kimu away. Desperation filled the air as Kimu called out Vikir's name, pleading for his help. Vikir watched the scene unfold with mounting frustration, grappling with the situation. He recalled a time from the past when Kimu Morg, still an adolescent, had been held captive but had returned after annihilating the barbarians. Despite her formidable reputation as the Queen of Le Rouge at Lenoir, Vikir understood that he needed to take decisive action. Just then, the barbarian girl attacked, launching herself at Vikir with surprising speed. With remarkable agility, he evaded her strike, his senses heightened. To his astonishment, he realized she had drawn a bow to attack him. She quickly followed up with a swift kick that sent Vikir sliding back, forcing him to reassess her capabilities. Her movements were distinctly different from those of the other barbarians, leading him to wonder if he needed to unleash his full strength against her. But to his surprise, the barbarian girl attempted to communicate in his language. "You and I, we meet again," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. Vikir's eyes narrowed as he recognized her, the very barbarian he had freed during the slave auctions. He couldn't help but label her a bastard in his mind. The smirk deepened as she reiterated, "We meet again." Vikir's mind raced back to the slave auction where he had liberated her from her cage. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you planning to repay my act of kindness with revenge?" The barbarian girl shook her head, her expression firm. "My vengeance is directed at the Morg clan. They are the ones who captured and enslaved me. You have no part in this." With that, she mounted her Wolf and declared, "I will repay what I have endured. My aim is to take Kimu, the next leader of the Morg clan, as payment for my suffering. If you wish to rescue her, then you must follow us." Vikir contemplated whether he should reveal his power in this precarious situation. Just then, Camus's uncle, Adolf, arrived, calling out her name. Vikir studied Adolf Morg, wondering if he had come after learning about the ambush. Without hesitation, Adolf began casting a spell, angrily labeling the barbarians as bastards. The ground trembled and shattered under the force of his magic as he demanded the return of his niece. However, the barbarians adeptly maneuvered over the broken terrain, using their wolves to leap nimbly between the shattered rocks and escape. Adolf watched in frustration, his displeasure evident. Vikir recalled Balak's earlier warning and how the ambush had unfolded a mere 3 minutes after the bell had sounded. The escalation of the situation seemed rooted in Camus's impulsiveness and lack of practical experience. Vikir then noticed a mage approaching Adolf, informing him that the barbarians had fled to the restricted area of Le Rouge at Lenoir Mountain. Adolf's face hardened with anger upon hearing this news. He was all too aware of the dangers that lurked in the uncharted, hazardous terrain. A wave of concern washed over him as he considered the risks of venturing there at night. Despite his niece's peril, he found himself questioning whether there was any action he could realistically take in this dire predicament. Just then, Vikir spoke up, asserting that they could still pursue the barbarians. Adolf was taken aback, questioning the wisdom of such a suggestion, as entering the forest at night was notoriously perilous. Before Adolf could voice further concerns, Vikir confidently declared that he had extensive experience navigating dense forests since childhood. He reflected on his past, realizing that prior to his regression, he had acquired valuable skills through reconnaissance and subjugation in various dense woodlands. Adolf grabbed Vikir by the shoulders, eager to confirm his seriousness. "Are you truly committed to this task?" he asked, searching Vikir's eyes for any hint of doubt. The Morg clan mage, addressing Adolf as the Grand Senator, cautioned him that venturing to Le Rouge at Lenoir Mountain would be a suicide mission. However, Adolf brushed aside the warning, stating that those unwilling to take the risk were free to abstain, and he wouldn't hold it against them later. Turning back to Vikir, Adolf acknowledged the extraordinary nature of this young man. Reluctantly, he realized he had no other choice but to trust in Vikir's abilities. "I entrust you with the responsibility of saving my niece," he said, his voice firm yet tinged with desperation. The dense forest of Le Rouge at Lenoir Mountain, nestled within Baskerville territory, was notorious for its treacherous conditions. It was a perilous habitat teeming with bone-sucking mosquitoes, poisonous thorny vines, silent spiders, and a host of other dangerous creatures. Locals often referred to it as the life-engulfing forest, as a typical person wouldn't survive there for more than an hour. Despite the risks, Morg and Baskerville's troops closely followed Vikir as he skillfully navigated the treacherous terrain. His swift movements through the dense underbrush left Adolf thoroughly impressed. Unable to contain his curiosity, Adolf turned to Staffordshire Baskerville and asked, "Are all boys from the Baskerville clan like Vikir?" Staffordshire replied with a wry smile, "Not all individuals are like that." However, he acknowledged that young Master Vikir was an exception. As Vikir encountered two poisonous bees obstructing their path, he effortlessly eliminated them with remarkable skill. The Baskerville triplets watched in awe, finding him undeniably cool. Suddenly, Vikir halted behind a tree and signaled the group to stop. He noticed a flickering light ahead and informed them that the barbarians hadn't fled too far. Sharing a rumor he had heard about the Balak hunters, he mentioned how they scattered dry leaves to listen for the sounds of their pursuers, emphasizing the need for extra caution from that point onward. Unexpectedly, Adolf stepped forward and cast a spell called Silence over Vikir. Puzzled, Vikir looked at him, and Adolf quickly explained that the magic would prevent any noise as Vikir moved. With a smile, he declared that he would take over from there, expressing gratitude for Vikir's assistance. He referred to Vikir as his nephew-in-law, leaving Vikir momentarily confused by the familial term. Not far from their location, the barbarians had set up camp in the forest, with a fire crackling at its center. Kimu, tied to a tree trunk with ropes, shouted at the barbarians, threatening to burn them all to death once she escaped. She boasted about her special fireball, warning them to prepare themselves. However, the barbarians paid no attention, likely because they couldn't understand her language. Nearby, a couple of barbarian girls engaged in conversation, one expressing her admiration for the guy they had encountered earlier, while her companion lamented her failure in husband hunting. Frustrated by their indifference, Kimu realized they weren't even listening to her. She concluded they must have been discussing husband hunting and wife hunting, wondering if that was the reason for their ambush. Just then, the barbarian male who had captured her approached with a smirk. He spoke to her in the barbarian tongue, suggesting that since they had captured such an excellent female, all the males in their tribe would desire her. Kimu shot back, calling him a perverted bastard and pleading for him to kill her instead. The barbarian scratched his ear and remarked that he didn't understand her words, but he could tell she was talking back just by looking into her eyes. With an evil grin, he licked the arrowhead in his hand, implying that this arrogant slave needed to be disciplined. Just as the argument between Kimu and Ahun was about to escalate, the barbarian girl whom Vikir had saved from the slave auction arrived on the scene. She addressed Ahun, calling him by name, and firmly told him to stay away from her slave. Ahun was taken aback, pride swelling as he called out to her, "Commander Ian, I'm the one who captured Kimu." Ian dismissed his prideful proclamation, urging him to keep his voice down. Ahun insisted on his achievements, claiming he had shot a paralyzing arrow and set a trap to capture their target. In response, Ian pointedly remarked that it was thanks to her intervention that Ahun's life had been spared, as she had stopped the boy who was skilled with a sword. "If it weren't for me, you'd be dead by now," she asserted. Ahun shot back, questioning whether Kimu had become the commander's prize. Ian confirmed his suspicion with a smirk. Kimu, with her limited understanding of their language, managed to grasp Ian's name and deduced her position as the commander. Ahun, realizing Ian was a female commander, scoffed, but Ian retorted, asking what difference that made. As Kimu assessed the situation, she recognized that Ian possessed the skills to go up against Vikir, a low-ranking graduator. If she wanted to escape, she knew she would have to deal with Ian somehow. Ahun, unable to contain his frustration, pointed a finger at Ian, declaring he wouldn't tolerate her stubbornness simply because she held the title of commander. Ian's eyes narrowed, a blue aura enveloping her as she warned Ahun that if he was angry, he could come at her anytime, and she would turn him into a bloody mess. Fear struck Ahun, and he broke out in a cold sweat. He raised his hands in surrender, conceding defeat, and telling Ian to do as she pleased. Once Ahun left, Kimu looked at Ian, realizing the girl had won their dispute. Ian then shifted her focus to Kimu, praising her good looks and physique, noting that such qualities were expected of the future leader of the Morg bloodline. But then, Ian kicked Kimu, revealing her own past. She explained that she had been captured by the Morg bastards and sold into slavery, but managed to escape through kindness. Ian warned Kimu that she wouldn't be as fortunate, vowing to break her spirit until she felt it in her bones and soul. The ominous threat continued as Ian hinted that performing menial tasks like licking the space between her toes would become a daily routine for Kimu. Suddenly, a loud scream erupted behind Ian. She turned to see a large fire and questioned if it was an explosion. One of the barbarians was engulfed in flames, screaming in agony. The others hastily prepared their weapons, shouting that it was an ambush. From the flames emerged a figure, condemning the barbarians and vowing to repay them for their deeds. Camus's face lit up with a smile as she recognized the voice and shouted, "Uncle!" It was Adolf Morg, responsible for the massive explosion, standing tall with flames still flickering in his hands. In a stern voice, he demanded the immediate return of his niece. The barbarians were taken aback as members of the Baskerville and Morg clans began hunting them down. Perched on a tree branch, Vikir observed the chaos, noting how peculiar it was that the Balak hunters, who had ambushed them with such precision, were now in complete disarray. The barbarian girls rode their wolves, their frustration palpable as they navigated the chaotic uproar caused by the Baskerville and Morg clan members in the forest at night. Adolf, his gaze fixed on the fleeing barbarians, shouted with determination that they should not be allowed to escape, insisting on eliminating every last one of them. Tied to a tree, Kimu watched the chaos unfold, a smile creeping onto her face as satisfaction washed over her. They deserved every bit of this turmoil. However, her moment of glee was abruptly interrupted when she heard sounds from behind her. Turning around in shock, she caught sight of Vikir. He placed a finger to his lips, signaling her to be silent, but her excitement overwhelmed her, and she couldn't help but shout his name. Vikir swiftly cut the ropes binding her, offering his hand to help her up. Kimu beamed with joy, asking if he had come to rescue her. Slightly annoyed, Vikir questioned her inability to grasp the importance of silence in such a precarious situation. Just then, Ayn appeared before them, her presence commanding attention. She recognized Vikir's exceptional knife-wielding skills and praised his strong physique, noting how it allowed him to cover long distances quickly. Ayn acknowledged his level-headedness that guided him through the darkness, and his passionate love that compelled him to risk his life for Kimu. With a smile, Ayn conveyed that she wouldn't pry into Vikir's past, her expression implying that he had passed some unspoken test. Vikir was left perplexed, wondering what exactly he had achieved to earn her approval. A silent battle of intent ensued between Kimu and Ayn, their gazes locked in a tense standoff. Vikir tightened his grip around Kimu, a flicker of unease passing through him as he realized it might be difficult to conceal his abilities in this charged atmosphere. He couldn't shake the feeling that Ayn was more than just a fierce commander. He pondered why he couldn't recall anyone like her from his previous life. Was she the one who had scarred Hugo's nose bridge, the infamous Balak archer known as the Night Fox? But he quickly dismissed the thought. She seemed too young and inexperienced to be that person. Suddenly, a barbarian lunged from the shadows, launching a surprise attack on Vikir with a dart. With reflexes honed by countless battles, he managed to block the attack with his hand, shattering the dart upon contact. It was the same barbarian who had kidnapped Kimu, and the look of astonishment on his face told Vikir that he had not expected such a swift counter. Vikir then took Kimu in his arms, informing her that things had become troublesome and he would take her to her uncle. Blushing, Kimu agreed, surprised by his formal language, which she attributed to the effects of the poison. As they moved swiftly from their location, Vikir asked if she was severely poisoned. Kimu replied uncertainly that she believed she might be. While they advanced, two barbarians fired arrows at Vikir. He skillfully blocked both attacks, ensuring their safety. Ayn, however, prepared her bow and arrow, taking aim at Kimu. With a cold tone, she questioned whether she should eliminate the girl from Morg. Without hesitation, she released the arrow, which left a bluish aura trail as it flew toward them. Vikir turned back just in time to see the arrow aim dangerously close to Camus's eye. As the arrow neared its mark, it froze in place, halted by a wall of ice cast by Adolf. He expressed his concern for Camus's well-being, and she called out to him, relieved. Adolf took hold of Kimu and cast a spell called Cure Poison on her, explaining that it was a severe numbing poison, making complete removal challenging. He suggested visiting the divine Quo Vadis for further treatment upon their return. However, Kimu pushed his hand away, requesting him to let go for a moment. Confused, Adolf complied. Kimu rushed towards Vikir, leaping into his arms and hugging him tightly. "Thank you for saving me again," she exclaimed. Adolf watched in surprise, tears welling in his eyes. He tried to interject, saying he had done his best, but Kimu, frowning, scolded him for arriving only now and threatened to tell her mother everything. As they moved forward, a rope suddenly shot toward Vikir, wrapping around his neck. Ayn had thrown it, trying to pull him closer. Yet, Vikir stood firm, not budging an inch, leaving Ayn bewildered by his strength. "You should come back with me," Ayn urged, urgency lacing her voice. "I don't have much time," Kimu gasped, recognizing Ayn and expressing her disbelief at seeing her again. Vikir snapped the rope off his neck and contemplated Ayn's haste, questioning why the Balak were in such a rush. Just then, a wave of killing intent swept through the forest, heightening the tension for everyone involved. Birds took flight in a panic, and a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Ayn looked up in horror, realizing that whatever she had feared had finally noticed their presence. Beelzebub on Vikir's hand began to buzz, and he glanced down to see red lines staining his skin. The hidden Beelzebub within his arteries was issuing an intense warning, signaling that something was approaching. "She's coming," Ayn gasped. Vikir shot her a questioning glance, unsure of who or what she was referring to. Cold sweat beaded on her forehead as she uttered, "Madam Eight Legs." Suddenly, a massive pillar-like structure erupted from the heart of the forest. The barbarians recognized it immediately, exclaiming, "It's the Madam! The Madam is here!" Kimu stared at the towering pillar, her mind racing with doubt. Vikir, however, shook his head. "No way." The pillar, shrouded in a purple aura, burst open to reveal 8 elongated appendages that resembled branches. These legs descended rapidly, rooting themselves firmly in the ground. Adolf, overwhelmed with disbelief, voiced his shock, unable to fathom how such a monstrous creature could remain concealed in the forest. Vikir's face turned anxious. He had never anticipated encountering this monster here. He recognized the creature as Madam Eight Legs, a notorious entity with an asterisk rating. The gigantic spider stood tall on its 8 legs, emitting a piercing scream that resonated throughout the forest, instilling terror in everyone present. All stood frozen, captivated by Madam Eight Legs' dominating figure. Kimu attempted to speak, but Vikir quickly placed a hand over her mouth, silencing her. "Don't make loud noises," he whispered urgently. Madam Eight Legs has poor sight but is extremely sensitive to touch and hearing. Memories flooded back to him, warnings he had heard from an old native before his regression. Tales associated with the Le Rouge at Lenoir Mountain, a horror story about the Madam with 8 legs who dwelled deep within the forest. The Empire's Monster Dictionary, after several revisions, had chilling accounts of Madam Eight Legs, ranked as an austere risk capable of nationwide destruction in a single day. Suddenly, Madam Eight Legs emitted another ear-piercing scream, unleashing a stream of greenish liquid from her mouth. Some of the corrosive substance splashed onto nearby tree branches, causing them to visibly melt before their eyes. Vikir skillfully dodged the falling poison rain while Adolf conjured a protective barrier to shield himself and Kimu. Ahun, the barbarian, panicked as some poison splashed onto his hair, screaming in terror. Ayn swiftly cut off Ahun's hair to prevent further exposure, leaving him on his knees, panting in terror. In a low, furious voice, she berated him for screaming in front of Madam Eight Legs. Casting a glance back at the towering creature, she warned, "If you weren't the shaman's grandchild, I would have killed you." Turning to the barbarians, Ayn commanded them to retreat in hushed tones. Adolf, still carrying Kimu, echoed her command, urging everyone to run. Madam Eight Legs responded with playful noises, seemingly amused by the chaos unfolding before her. Among the fleeing groups, the Balaks scattered in smaller clusters, while the Baskervilles and Morgs retreated together. The slight differences in their escape strategies helped Madam Eight Legs decide whom to chase. As the monstrous creature charged toward the Baskerville and Morg groups, Adolf expressed his frustration, questioning why it was targeting them. A Morg mage stepped forward confidently, declaring, "Leave the monster to me." He began casting a fire spell, asserting that fire would be the Boog's weakness. With a surge of power, he unleashed the fiery spell upon Madam Eight Legs, resulting in a colossal explosion that engulfed the area. The mage believed he had succeeded, boasting to Sir Adolf about the effectiveness of his attack. However, before he could say anything further, one of the mages beside him was impaled by one of Madam Eight Legs' limbs. Covered in his companion's blood, the mage trembled in fear, realizing that the fire spell had done nothing to stop the creature. As Adolf, Kimu, and Vikir continued to run, Kimu expressed her shock and bewilderment at the sight of the monstrous entity. Vikir, lost in thought, suddenly came to a halt, turning around to face Madame Eight Legs. His unexpected movement surprised everyone. "Vikir, what are you doing?" Staffordshire asked, concern etched on his face. "We need to keep moving." Vikir responded urgently, "We're all at risk of being annihilated if we don't act. Someone has to tie down the monster's legs." When Staffordshire volunteered, Vikir interrupted, skepticism lacing his voice. "Do you really think you can restrain her with your skills? We can't bring this monster into our territory. I'm the best person for the job." He placed a hand on the hilt of his sword and turned to Sir Adolf, stating, "There's no time left. It's your decision now." Kimu looked at Vikir in shock, calling out to him, but he pressed on, urging them to hurry and flee. Frustration welled up in Adolf as he made the call to run, determined not to let Vikir's sacrifice be in vain. Kimu, tears welling in her eyes, pleaded for Vikir to return, but Adolf insisted, "Don't look back, we need to get out of here." Tension mounted as Vikir prepared to face Madame Eight Legs alone. His grip around the hilt of his sword was initially tight, but he eventually loosened it and let out a sigh. He contemplated his situation, realizing he had no personal stake in the destruction of the Baskerville territory. Moreover, he believed the Allied forces wouldn't be able to stop Madame Eight Legs' growing power. Yet Vikir saw this as an opportunity. If he could fake his death, he could distance himself from Hugo's surveillance. This would buy him the time he needed to master the 10th technique that resided in his mind. Once skilled enough to stand against Hugo or adept at hiding and controlling his power, he planned to return to the clan. A red orb began to glow on Vikir's hand as soon Beelzebub emerged, pulsing with energy. In that moment, Vikir realized that if he didn't unleash every ounce of his power, he would die. With unwavering determination, he made the decision to utilize all available resources, the abundant mana from the River Styx's blessing, and the ethereal aura reserved for high-ranking Baskerville swordsmanship techniques. With the formidable demonic sword, Beelzebub, in his grip, Vikir was enveloped in a fierce red light. His eyes glowed with intensity as he resolved to unleash his full power. In a blur of motion, he darted toward Madame Eight Legs, leaping high into the air. Hovering above the monstrous creature, he locked eyes with her as she let out a bone-chilling scream. The aura emanating from his hand intensified, glowing brighter as he drew on the depths of his strength. With incredible speed, he rocketed toward Madame Eight Legs, employing the Baskerville 5th technique. As he closed in, the creature's legs became unwilling to move, pressed firmly into the ground by an unseen force. Vikir's attack struck Madame Eight Legs squarely on the head, forcing her down with tremendous impact. From a distance, a radiant red light became visible, rapidly expanding into a massive beam that shot up into the sky. Adolf ran with Kimu in his arms, the Baskerville triplets trailing behind, tears streaming down their faces. As Kimu witnessed the explosive clash, disbelief washed over her, and a single tear welled in her eye. Overwhelmed, she couldn't contain herself and shouted, "Vikir!" Only a bright red glow remained in the now silent forest, marking the aftermath of the powerful encounter. In stark contrast, Vikir found himself in a chilling vision. His head rested on a guillotine, and ahead of him stood Hugo Le Baskerville, illuminated by the moonlight. Hugo extended his hand, signaling for the guillotine to drop. As his head rolled on the ground, Vikir saw people staring at him with cold and feeling gazes. Soon, Hugo turned away, beginning to walk off into the shadows. Vikir's heart sank as he looked at the departing figure, a bitter realization dawning upon him. In the end, Hugo had done it.